So it's crazy I'm going to say this, but Penn State's going to win the national championship. You look at Penn State's schedule, pretty manageable, honestly. You get Oregon at home. Starting with the schedule. Oregon at home. They do have to go at Ohio State. That's going to be. But you look at that, I mean, pretty manageable. At Rutgers, Nebraska, at Michigan State versus Indiana, at UCLA. 3 games against Nevada, FIU, Villanova. Most likely should win those games. You look at Penn State's schedule and then their depth chart. You know, Penn State's quietly one of those teams where they just have been they keep creeping closer. You know, what was it, 2 or 3 straight years they finished with just 2 losses to Michigan, Ohio State. Both of those years, Michigan, Ohio State were really good. So Penn State though, they're gonna have what we here, but why Penn State I think is the interesting pick because I keep talking to people and I'm like, you know, who's going to win the national championship? A lot of the obvious answer is Texas, and I do like Texas this year, but people keep quietly saying, you know, Penn State. You know, I'm thinking like, yeah, why do I keep forgetting about Penn State? But here's what we know about Penn State, and then I'll get to maybe what could potentially be a concern. What we know Penn State has, they have a good edge rusher, Danny Dennis Sutton. They will have a good defense. They will have a good corner in A.J. Harris. He's a really nice player. They got a transfer linebacker to Mari Campbell. I'm not familiar. I guess I'm not too familiar with him. But I know. But what we know is having a good edge rusher and a good corner is big. And having a good defense is big. So we know that they will have a good defense. What we know on offense is they will have 3. They should have, I would say they should have 3 good receivers. They landed Kyron Hudson, Devontae Ross, Trevor Pena, 3 guys in the transfer portal, and then they will have a good running back room with depth. Nick Singleton, Katron Allen, experienced running backs that are both talented and both have been productive. So, and then you have Drew Aller, a potential top 5 pick, arguably, if he has that type of really, you know, outstanding season, could be the number 1 pick in next year's draft. So an NFL quarterback, 2 really good running backs that are both seniors now, talent at receiver, a good defense, and a good edge rusher who potentially could be an elite edge rusher, Danny Dennis Sutton. You watch Danny Dennis Sutton could be one of those guys where could remind similar to like Aiden Hutchinson a few years ago. He's sitting kind of like 20th, 30th in the consensus, maybe the number 4 or 5th edge rusher right now. I know it's still early in the draft process, but he could be a guy who has a great year and really rises. So this is when you're projecting a team to be a national championship team. Penn State kind of has all the ingredients. I guess my slight concern would be in the offensive line, but they've shown each year their offensive lines, you know, it's been pretty solid. Like Penn State's never really had a, you know, average, well, arguably maybe 1 or 2 years under James Franklin, they've been just kind of average on the offensive line. But Penn State, though, their offensive line I think it should be solid at the very least because it's some veteran guys. Drew Shelton, senior. I don't want to butcher this guy's name. Redshirt junior. Nick Dawkins, redshirt senior. And then, Cooper Cousins, sophomore. And then you got a senior. So it's a veteran offensive line, veteran running back room, transfer receivers. And it seems like Penn State finds at least a guy. And then tight end, too. Tight end maybe a little bit of a question mark, but it seems like Penn State always kind of has a guy step up. You know, Penn State always has at least 1 or 2 productive tight ends, over the past few years. Even going back to, Gesicki, who was the guy, they've had some guy, they'll have a guy at tight end. So, I mean, Penn State, that's the thing about Penn State. It's a mix of, a lot of projection to be good with a couple guys that could be elite and not just guys that, and they could be, not just players that, they could be elite at players, or at positions that are critical. So quarterback, edge rusher, and corner, they could have 3 potentially elite players. So I'm thinking, that's the thing about Penn State. There's not, I don't know, I guess this is an interesting argument. When you're sometimes the team where you're not or there's not a lot to nitpick, sometimes that's the team that, if there's I guess what I'm trying I don't know. This is I guess my point. I'm trying. It's hard to. I'm having a hard time articulating. Sometimes a team wins a national title and they come into that year with a question mark. I guess that's the, sometimes a team like this where there's not a lot of question marks, sometimes they don't win it for whatever reason. Um, but yeah, I think Penn State, though, to me is my national title pick just because low key, manageable schedule, quietly manageable schedule. Like you're talking about, like they should start out 3-0. Nevada, FIU, Villanova, and then and then they beat because here's what this is their schedule sets up perfectly for them to build a lot of confidence. Like you went okay, they start 3-0. Let's say hypothetically they start 3-0. Obviously they have to do it. I would say it's highly likely against Nevada, FIU, Villanova, 3 games at home. I mean, they should be should be at least 20-point favorites in all 3 of those games. Maybe even one of those games like a 28, 29, 30-point favorite. So let's say they start 3-0. You play or you get Oregon at home. It's a whiteout NBC primetime game. So then you're like, okay, we're 3-0. They beat Oregon in that NBC primetime game. Everyone in the college football world's watching. Now you're 4-0. You beat Oregon, a team that you needed to beat last year to win the Big Ten and kind of get that monkey off your back. Win the Big Ten. That was the team that you were trying, like, because Penn State just it seems like for several years now has just been starving to beat Michigan, get past Michigan, Ohio State, win the Big Ten. Last year they did not beat Ohio State, and then they lost to Oregon in a pretty hard fought game. So now you kind of get that monkey off your back, beating a team that beat you in the Big Ten. So now you're 4-0 with momentum in a very manageable next 3 games at UCLA, Northwestern, at Iowa could be quietly tough, but then the showdown happens at Ohio State November 1st, and then that's the thing. Penn State could easily be heading into this game 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-0 November 1st at Ohio State. And now Penn State, if you win that game, now that's like, this is where it's like, win in this game, and this is where you're like, okay, like the hype is on. Like it seems like there's a team, like, Penn State, I don't know, they are getting the preseason hype, but it seems like, I don't know, you could look at a lot of years where it's like, I can't think of a specific example, but there's a lot of teams I remember, like, I guess, for example, Washington a few years ago. Like, a lot of people thought Washington was going to be good that year with Penix. They made it to the playoff, lost to Michigan in the national title, but they had that signature win against Oregon. I think it was November. And then that's when people are like, okay, the buzz, the hype, the, kind of the questions are over. I think that's, if Penn State beats Ohio State November 1st, then, that's when the hype train's rolling and people are like, okay, Penn State is legit. And they've gotten past Ohio State. They've taken down Oregon. And then now you look after that, what's interesting though, they do play Indiana the next game, which could be kind of a trap game coming off potentially a big win against Ohio State if they do kind of do that, if they do get that done. But they do get Indiana at home. So Indiana and then at Michigan State, Nebraska at home, and then at Rutgers. So Penn State, it's interesting. I think that's why I'm projecting them to win it all, just because, I don't know, I think they could still stumble, but I think they might still stumble against maybe Indiana or Nebraska here towards the end of the season. But I think, the momentum, the relief, just if they were to take down Oregon, Ohio State, even if they take down Oregon or Ohio State, I think that is huge, especially Ohio State. But just beating one of those 2 teams, I think that's when Penn State's saying, like, okay, we can do this. So, Penn State's a very interesting team. That Penn State's my pick. It's a little tough for me to say, being a Michigan fan, but I'm like, every year I like to try to see what team I think is going to win it all. or like to project what team. And this year I kept, I went through a lot of teams, and Texas, to me, I think Texas is a lot of people's choice, but am concerned with the Texas offensive line. Sometimes you don't see a lot of teams win a national title when they have that when you lose a mass amount of guys in the offensive line. What do they have? Just one returning starter on the offensive line? When you lose, especially when you lose two NFL guys on the offensive line, usually the next year, it's hard. It's hard to lose good players at any. It's hard to lose good players, at any position, but especially on the offensive line, that's one unit group, if you will, where if you lose multiple players to the NFL, it's just really hard to overcome that. So that's my concern with Texas. And then, Georgia should be good, but you look at Georgia, I guess I'm kind of just comparing why I think Penn State. You look at Georgia, they just don't. Georgia, I don't think this year, kind of like in this past year, they just haven't had the difference makers and the overall. They still got the depth there. They still definitely got talent. They've recruited well, but they just don't have the difference makers they've had. So Penn State, they have some difference makers, and the schedule is manageable. So, and then I guess other team, Bama I like a lot too, just because of the O-line. Bama has some guys back. Obviously, Kalen DeBoer will be hungry to. Bounce back by which was a down season relative to Alabama standards. But yeah, Penn State's my pick. And yeah, I didn't realize Penn State's schedule. Yeah, I don't know. The more you look at Penn State's schedule, the more more you could say, yeah, it could actually be kind of sneaky tough. Like at Iowa, Indiana after Ohio State. Especially if they were to beat Ohio State, then you're like, oh, that's that kind of a trap game. And then, yeah, you never know. At Michigan State could be better this year. Michigan State, and then in Nebraska too. Even Nebraska, you get Nebraska at home, but Nebraska could be, they could be a solid team. And then at UCLA, you never know. UCLA could be better at UCLA. It's a long journey to play. And then, yeah, Oregon will be, for sure that'll be tough. NBC night game is a whiteout. But yeah, do avoid, Penn State does avoid Michigan though, for another year, which is big. So yeah, picking the Nittany Lions to win the national title. It'll be interesting. But yeah, the difference makers they have, talent at receiver, veteran offensive line, potential or NFL level quarterback, potential top 5, top 3 pick, Danny Dennis Sutton. Good edge rusher. Zane Durant, too, is a nice defensive tackle, too. And then a good defense are kind of some of the reasons I'm projecting Penn State to win the national title.